This is The Road Ahead, Chapter 4, Mission Somewhat Possible. Amidst the muffled hum of wheels upon the road and the ever-rolling hills along the horizon, Roman had allowed his exhaustion to take the better of him. He savored the calm that came with sleep. Even his dreams emerged pleasant, a break from the commotion. He wished he could have stayed that way longer. He wasn't sure how much time had passed before he felt a finger poking at his shoulder. Roman groaned, curling tighter into himself. It had taken a bit of effort to find a comfortable position in such a crowded space. After quite some time, he had managed to be satisfied with curling up and leaning against the window, his head jerking to the side every time the vehicle passed over a bump of sorts. Again, he felt someone nudge his shoulder. Roman waved it off lazily. Moments later, something cold stuck in his ear. That was enough to spring him awake. "Remus!" he shouted, shoving his brother away and wiping at his skin. "A wet willy? Seriously?" His brother shrugged, his expression anything but sorry. "You're awake, aren't you? I think you should be thanking me." "I'll thank you, all right, with a fist to the face." Roman thrust forward, and the twins erupted in a fit of laughter as they traded punches in the back seat. Never enough to cause harm, but enough to leave Virgil grumbling from the passenger's seat. "Oh my God, one was enough." He dragged his hands across his face, sighing through his fingers. "End my misery, please." "Not to worry, Virgil. We've made it," Janice said. The car slowed to a stop and Roman craned his neck to gain a closer look. Darkness surrounded the space. Moonlight shone in a silver cast down upon the ground. They had come to rest in a circle of trees, the trunks of which shot up from the ground like pillars, and held branches just as menacing. Janice unlocked the doors of the car without a word and motioned for the others to step out. They filed out one by one, and their footsteps crunched underneath the autumn leaves that had left the branches above bare. Roman caught Logan shivering from the corner of his eye, and this time he felt guilty for not finding another jacket. "Where are we exactly?" Patton's gentle voice broke the silence. Reminded of the mission, everyone's uneasiness shifted to attention. "Tetracorp's West Branch," Janice muttered, not caring to meet anyone's eyes. He kept his gaze forward, as if in anticipation. Anticipation of what? No one quite knew. Patton tilted his head. "This doesn't look very much like a building." Janice didn't speak. His hand rose, a single finger pointing to the space above the trees. Their gazes followed, and above the horizon stood a structure of silver and reflective blue. The windows allowed no indication of what lay inside. It peaked above the treetops with a towering intimidation, and even the moonlight seemed to shy away from its sharp edges. "Let's go. Time is of the essence." With muffled footsteps, Janice crept forward until he was no longer visible amongst the trees. Roman, Logan, and Patton all glanced at the remaining two for any sort of guidance, and Remus motioned for them to follow. He nodded to Virgil, who had gone to retrieve a rolled piece of paper from the car. He returned shortly after. It was a short walk, maybe minutes at the most, but to Roman it felt like an eternity. Even his brothers seemed to be without words for the journey. He longed to speak to someone, loosen the tension with spoken words, or gain some sort of explanation for what was about to go down. It was only as they reached the outer fence that anyone dared to speak. "So, what's the plan, Jan?" Remus said, then fell into a fit of giggles. "Oop, that rhymes." Janice rolled his eyes. He glanced at Virgil, who unrolled the paper. Traced in cobalt ink was an entire map of the facility, each level shown in a bird's eye view. There were 11 squares, representing 11 floors, and each had been overlaid with a grid pattern which displayed the square footage. This should be pretty simple as long as no one screws anything up. No pressure, of course, Virgil said. His eyes darted across the page. He was nervous, but trying not to show it. There should be a hallway here that leads straight to the archives. If we take this entrance... No. Janice pushed Virgil's hand away from where it had traced their route. There will be guards stationed all around this entrance at this time of night. We need to cut through the boiler room. There's a vent on the outside that should be large enough to fit us. He guided Virgil's finger until it pointed to a small square on the opposite side of the building. We'd have to sneak around the entire property to get there. That's the only area where they don't care to have surveillance. I'd just love for us all to get caught because you didn't want to walk a few extra minutes. Virgil frowned at the remark, but didn't argue further. He cleared his throat to continue. Once we've made it through the boiler room, Virgil emphasized with a pointed glance in Janice's direction, there's an emergency staircase that'll take us to the correct floor. There, we'll use a key card to unlock the archives and get the file we need. Logan's brows furrowed. Do you have a key card on your person? Remus giggled. That's the fun part. We get to find one. The glint in his eyes left Logan both intrigued and wary. We need to get moving. Janice folded the paper carefully and handed it to Virgil, who tucked it into a bag he had strung across his back. He pulled his hood over his head, and Janice did the same with his own jacket. Remus popped his own collar with a grin, being the only of the three without an actual hood. Stick close. There's no telling what could go unexpected. In response, Logan and Roman shuffled closer together. Both their eyes moved in search of Patton, only to find he had shifted to Virgil's side. They exchanged a glance. Patton shot them a confused look, and Roman smirked, mouthing to Logan, "He's oblivious, isn't he?" He got a nod in return, though their conversation was cut short as the others set out along the fence. They crept across the grounds, pushing aside stray branches and ducking every time a shred of light threatened to reveal their position. The further they moved, the farther the shadows crept, until they reached an area completely in darkness. Through the ringlets of the fence, a grate was visible. The entrance. Roman felt a tap on his shoulder, and he whirled around to meet Janice's golden eyes. "You're first," he said. "Me?" Did I stutter? Our time shrinks every time you ask questions. Roman opened his mouth to protest. He didn't know anything about large corporations, much less what to do when illegally trespassing. If anything, Roman should be the last one to step foot on the grounds. Janice placed a finger on his lips before Roman could speak, his expression softening for just a moment. "You'll be fine. I promise." After a reassurance like that, how could Roman do anything but trust him? He stepped up to the fence, anchoring his feet in the wire. Thank goodness there weren't any defenses up, such as barbed wire or electricity. It brought the slightest bit of comfort to Roman despite what lay ahead. He cleared the fence with relative ease, and after waiting a few seconds of silence, the others began to cross the barrier as well. Janice was the last to land, and as he strode forward, Roman caught his attention. "Did you really know nothing would happen when I climbed over?" Janice paused his movement, turning to Roman with a smirk. "Not entirely, though I hoped telling you that you'd be all right would keep you from panicking." He pushed past Roman, though shot back one last glance, his eyes shimmering in the moonlight. "I'm glad you're unharmed, though. It would be a crime to harm that pretty face." Roman thanked the shadows for concealing his scarlet cheeks. They reached the grate. A disappointing attempt at removing it proved that all four corners had been bolted down. There was a moment of hushed curses and scrambling for a plan B, though Logan halted such acts by reaching in his pocket. He pulled out a small multi-tool, and a smug grin crossed his face as he unscrewed all four bolts without struggle. Logan's triumph was quickly moved on from, and the six climbed through the grate with minimal difficulty. Once inside, the real mission began. Everyone's eyes snapped to Janus. His gaze was forward, already calculating what had to be a million scenarios. Something in his expression read nervous, and Roman caught Virgil placing a gentle hand on the other's shoulder. Silent reassurance. The moment of pause was broken quickly. Soon they had exited the boiler room, and Patton ensured the door was shut quietly before they continued forward. The staircase sat behind a side door in the corridor, but before anyone could round the corner to step inside, Janus pushed them back with a finger to his lips. Virgil raised a brow, opening his mouth to question, though he fell silent as the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Guards. They waited in tense silence until the sound had gone before daring to enter the stairwell. A creak sounded as they opened the door, and everyone flinched at the noise. No one came for them. 6 flights of stairs awaited them, and as the 6 finally reached the top, Remus let out a puff of air, bending over to rest his hands on his knees. "Wow," he wheezed. "I did not think that was going to be that hard." "Maybe next time don't try sprinting ahead of the group," Logan smirked. "Focus." Janus cut them off before Remus could offer a rebuttal. Both quieted, though frowned as they did so. The words documentation and additional testing were engraved into a plaque upon the 6th floor. It was silver, the cold metal intimidating. Roman could only imagine all the cruelties committed within these walls. He prayed he'd never have to see it for himself. Janus beckoned them into the hall with a wave of his hand, though stumbled as his foot caught onto something. Roman rushed forward and caught Janus's wrist with a thrust of his hand, pulling the man up to meet his gaze, so close that he could feel Janus's quickened breaths. They were still for a moment, before Janus pushed away. "I didn't need your help," he muttered, brushing an invisible dust from his jacket. He turned away before Roman could answer. His gaze instead slipped to the floor in search of what had caused his fall. Black cords ran all across the tile flooring, loops and swirls all joining as they passed under the same door. Janus dared to venture closer, and Virgil held up a hand. Warning. Warning of what? Roman wondered. What did Virgil know that they didn't? He stepped closer until he was but an inch from the door. A flash blazed from underneath the doorway. Then a scream. It was blood-curdling, something that cried of pure agony. It was enough to bring the sting of tears to Roman's eyes. The sound had been so filled with anguish, piercing. He looked over to see Patton ready to tear at the seams. "Let's go, Jan. We've got to focus, remember?" Remus was the one to speak this time, though rather than sarcasm his eyes had grown soft. It was just enough to snap Janus from his daze. Navigating the hall was slightly more difficult with the added obstacle of the cords. Not totally unmanageable, however, for the archives room merely sat around the corner at the end of the hall. So close, reachable within moments, though anyone knew too much could happen in a matter of seconds. They came to an intersection, the last thing standing between them and their bounty. Remus strolled forward despite Janus's protests, though came back with a triumphant expression. "There's guards on both sides, but they're not paying attention at all. I think one of them might actually be asleep, which makes sense, because it is pretty late," he chuckled. Get to the point, please, Remus. Oh, right. They don't seem very attentive, so as long as we're quiet, they probably won't catch on to us. All right. Janus sighed through his nose. We'll go in pairs to reduce noise. Remus, you're welcome to take the first step. Remus nodded eagerly and glanced at Logan, who only somewhat reluctantly offered his hand. They leapt across the space with little to no issue. Roman didn't know his brother could actually do something without making a sound. It was a welcome surprise. He had barely registered it was his turn until a hand slipped into his own. Roman had the wits to flinch, but he was soon met with Janus's cool expression and the smirk that was just as infuriating. Their journey was short, maybe 3 steps at most across the intersection. Patton and Virgil were last. All went smoothly until the tip of Virgil's boot caught onto a stray cord. His eyes grew wide, and a mutual gasp shot through the group. Patton shot his arms out, flailing to grasp onto the hem of his hoodie, but the material slipped helplessly through his fingers. There was no stopping it. Virgil hit the ground. Not even a beat passed before 2 sets of eyes snapped onto the pair. Virgil had but a second to mouth, "Run," to the rest of the group before the guards rushed forward. The click of a closet door was the only indication the others had gotten away, hidden as they couldn't enter the archives without a key. Patton helped Virgil to his feet, only to face 2 smug expressions, both sporting the Tetracorp logo upon their chests. Well, isn't this a fun sight? The guard in front cracked their knuckles. And I thought I wouldn't get to have any fun today. Virgil felt Patton tense at his side. He pressed down his own anxieties. Lucky for you, we were just on our way. Sorry to interrupt on your duties. Now hold on just a moment. A smirk crossed the lead guard's face as he caught Virgil's arm. You're not going anywhere. And in that moment, Virgil was faced with a concept as old as time. When faced with a threat, there were 3 options: fight, flight, and freeze. Virgil made his choice clear. In one swift moment, he swung forward and broke the guard's nose with his open palm. They reeled back with a cry, blood escaping the hold of their outstretched fingers and dropping in scarlet beads onto the floor. The remaining guard was upon them too quickly. Virgil snuck a glimpse towards the archives. So much for that goal. He dipped back, avoiding a swing that would have surely left a bruise. He countered by dropping to the floor and sweeping his leg across the tiles. A low grunt was enough to indicate he had met his target. The lead guard had managed to recover from the broken nose. Their sleeve was stained maroon from where they had wiped away the blood, and Virgil smirked at the shred of pain that still contorted their expression. An angered cry escaped their lips as they charged at Virgil, and this time he was too slow to duck out of the way. The blow grazed his shoulder, but it was enough to knock him off his balance. Once righted, he was faced with not 1, but 2 guards. This fight was beginning to look a lot less fair. Fists flew, and Virgil responded with a jab of his own. He managed to strike one in the stomach, momentarily knocking the wind out of them. He dodged another and slid to the side in order to avoid the returning leader. His breaths were coming in short. He was tiring too fast. "Patton," he called amidst avoiding a blow to the temple. "Do something." "I can't," Patton sputtered. He was huddled in the corner, hugging his arms around himself as if that could stop the violence in front of him. "It's not right." Virgil turned to shoot an exasperated look in Patton's direction, but was stopped as a strong hand grabbed him from behind. He struggled in their grip, kicking frantically and just managing to slip away. However, As he turned, he was met with a blunt force that left him seeing stars. Virgil crumpled to the ground and winced as he was yanked up by the hair. Amidst his blurry vision, he could make out Patton in the corner, eyes wide and shaking like a leaf. They had to be done for. He hoped Janice had found that key card and was sneaking off to the archives as they spoke. "You actually put up quite the challenge," the guard chuckled, twirling the same weapon that had struck Virgil in their hand. "I bet Dr. Keranos will love to hear all about you." "Too bad. I don't really want to share." Virgil wrestled in their grip to no avail. He cast a frantic glance to Patton, and the guard caught on to his gaze. "Oh, don't worry. You're next," they said with a sneer, signaling the other to step forward. Patton's eyes widened. "Don't step any closer." His voice wavered. "What are you gonna do? Make me apologize? This is the real world, kid. It's about time you ditched the niceties and grow up." Something flashed in Patton's eyes, something that left even Virgil on edge. The tremble to his form stopped, and as he glanced up to meet the guard's eyes, there was a quirk of smile on his lips. "Alrighty then. I warned you." The guard didn't have a chance to respond as a shoe collided with their head. They stumbled back and clumsily lost their weapon in the process. Patton was on them in an instant, gripping the weapon so tight his knuckles had grown pale. There was a sliver of fear in his eyes, though above that shone something more powerful. Anger. "I told you not to step closer." He dragged the weapon upon the floor, and for once the guard had the wits to back up. It's not very nice to ignore people, or hurt their friends. He shot a look at Virgil, who appeared utterly stunned. "Let him go, and we can forgive each other." The lead guard narrowed their eyes. "I don't think so." They drew Virgil closer in mockery, and he sucked in a breath through his teeth, scowling at his captor. Patton sighed, pinching his lips tight. He swung the weapon without a moment's hesitation, catching the guard's temple with a deafening crack. They fell to the floor and didn't get up. Virgil prayed they were only unconscious. Patton was on the other in a second, already raising the weapon above his head in a wide arc. Frantic, the leader released Virgil and went for their own weapon. They swung towards Patton, but he was too fast. He darted round the final guard, and just as they turned, he thrust forward. A low thud rattled the ground as they dropped, their weapon rolling far down the hall. A puff of breath submerged as Patton gathered himself. The glint to his eyes had vanished, replaced instead with dread. His fingers shook slightly. Likely he was trying to stifle the movement in order not to worry Virgil. "I am so sorry," he muttered between his fingers. "I wasn't thinking. You were just hurt, and they wouldn't listen, and I couldn't watch them hurt you." Virgil got to his feet and placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's all right. You saved us. Thank you for that." "I don't deserve a thank you." Patton's eyes trailed to the floor. "I didn't want to hurt them." "Hey, don't worry about that. They're the bad guys." Virgil walked over and nudged one of the guards with his foot. They groaned, though the rise and fall of their chests was clear. "Look, they're only unconscious. Please don't blame yourself too much." "Okay." Patton blew a breath through his cheeks. "Plus, now we have a key card." Virgil plucked the silver card from one guard's belt loop and tried to ignore the splotches of blood on the corner. "You ready to go?" Patton took a moment to survey the scene. He picked at his nails if only to distract himself from the damage. He turned back to Virgil with a gentle smile. "Yeah, I think so. They crossed the rest of the intersection until Virgil spotted the door he had seen the others duck into. A glance was exchanged, Patton nodding to Virgil as he rested his hand on the wood and knocked 3 times. The knob turned slowly as 4 faces peeked through the threshold. Virgil smiled weakly, and the others rushed out, frantic to see what had gone down. Whoa! You guys got to beat up the bad guys without me? So not fair! Remus crossed his arms. We also got the key. Virgil raised the thin card for everyone to see. You can thank Patton for that one. Looks of surprise drifted in the college student's direction, though Patton purposefully avoided those preening eyes. Janice cleared his throat. Shall we move on then? I have a feeling we may not be welcome for much longer. A mutual agreement flowed through the group, and they hastily made their way round the corner. A keypad was bolted into the wall and shone a dull turquoise. It held a light at the top, and as Virgil placed the keycard over top it, it flashed a brilliant green. The sound of the door unlocking echoed through the hall. Virgil rested his hand on the knob, awaiting the confirmation to continue. Janice nodded, and everyone seemed to hold their breath at what would await them. Virgil turned the knob, and with a deep breath, they entered the archives. This has been Chapter 4 of The Road Ahead. Thank you so very much for listening, and I will see you next time for Chapter 5.